Welcome to Directly Correct, a People podcast with Cole and Scott. Today's guest, Harold Goldstein and Charles Scherbaum, professors at Baruch College.
Thanks to our sponsors, Lightcast. The world is full of talent data, but more data can lead to more questions, uncertainty, and stagnation as organizations sift through it to figure out what's fact from what's fiction. Lightcast talent intelligence platform answers your most difficult workforce questions to drive meaningful business results. With more than 20 years of experience as MC in Burning Glass, Lightcast accelerates your work, bringing together hundreds of billions of vetted, constantly updated data points and incredible insights to drive strategic talent decisions. Your organization can tap into the deepest open repository of skills, supply, and demand data in the world to transform your hunches into a skills-based future for your organization. Lightcast's flexible solution, used by 67 of the Fortune 100, can integrate your own data, be guided by in-house talent experts, and give you the tools and confidence to explore it for yourself. To learn more, book a demo at lightcast.io. All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization. You know another thing I've been following. I'm like obsessed with it now. To be honest with you, I'm obsessed with the idea of it, but I refuse to research it closely enough to know the true facts of the situation because I have this story in my mind and I don't want this story to get overruled. So the professor lady from Harvard, right, who we've talked about on the podcast before, who was I think she's an economist, but she did like research on like telling lies and like lie detection and stuff. And then
I
I guess
don't recall this. I don't recall this.
Okay, well, so I'll the rundown was, and again, I'm obsessed with it, but also have poorly researched it.
That's
That
fine. Yeah.
it showed that some of her research didn't stand up to replication. Right, so she was
Okay.
like one of these people, and so the irony of it was, professor who does research on lying lied about their research. Right, the story writes
Yes.
itself.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I'm in love with it. Fast forward, I met the person who actually uncovered the research. Right, they're actually a listener to our podcast. Been trying desperately to get them on the podcast. They won't come. They don't want to talk about it. I'm like, whatever. But new revelation. Not only did the professor fabricate their research, they also plagiarized. So they plagiarized a bunch of their research after they fabricated it. So it's like, you can't write, you can't do experiments, you can't do anything.
Well,
Like,
in for a penny, in for a pound, right? Like, why stop at just fabricating data? I mean, like, let's just go the full Monty.
so it's just so funny to me. It's like, what are you good at? Like everything you did was like basically a lie.
Well,
Like,
it's kind of like he doth protest too much, right? Like, there's something going on if you're talking about this that much, right? There's
exactly.
something that is really deep seated in you. I think it's the same reason that a lot of people go into, say, like counseling psych, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to fix themselves or they're trying to fix someone next to them, right? There's a reason why you go into this field and study the certain topics you do.
It's so true. I mean, I think a lot of people. I mean, I feel like it's almost a cliche now that IOs generally started out in like counseling or clinical, and then realized it wasn't for them,
Yeah.
and then become IOs because you can get paid more to do it, and you work with sane people, presumably. Like that, it's so common. It's a cliche, and I know I've fallen guilty of that. I think you have as well, sort of. So, yeah, like.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to do like I don't even know if you could pull it off, like some sort of, like office archetype. Maybe for the next Cold Scott, we'll try to find like the niche office archetypes that pop up in your life. You know, I don't know, like the personality hire, the guy that really can't seem to do anything, but like he's a great dude, so you run him around, you know? Like, all right.
When I think about those things, I love the idea, by the way. I think about those things as like, can you really identify that person using like a personality quiz? Like, could you find Dwight Schrute, in a personality quiz? Is that a personality? You used archetype. Is it a personality type?
I gotta think as IOs, if we put on our thinking cap and we really pursued it, we would. Right? Like maybe I'm being
I think
full of
you can make the
hubris.
argument. Not only we should. Why aren't we doing it?
Mm.
Like, why haven't we found the office personality validated construct measure to which office character are you, but it's not just one of these bullshit quizzes. Like it's a real thing.
Yeah, I've mentioned this before, but hell, if anyone out there wants to team up, I'm all game because I'm trying to figure it out. But essentially, trying to identify in sports, you call him a glue guy, right? He's not the
Mhm.
best. Well, look at basketball. He's not the best rebounder, not the best defender, not the best shooter, whatever. And ostensibly, they're serviceable, but they keep the team together. If that guy is off the court, the place goes to shambles, right? And how do you find that guy? Can you do it with network analytics? Is it a
Mhm.
personality type? Is it I don't know. Is it team? I don't know. It's not just a central hub in a network. It's not
Well,
that. It's something
I
else.
I've had the same thought, and I bet you've actually probably done some research into this. But is a glue guy the same in different organizations or different teams? Right? Is it the same set of characteristics that make someone gluey, or
Yeah.
is it like are they just truly like this kind of ephemeral type person that only exists in this one circumstance?
Even just like talking it out this much is already added a lot of nuance to it. Cause like I think of like just like very quickly a team of salespeople versus a team of high tech DEs. And their personalities are so different that the glue guy's got to be different, right? I got to believe that.
Yeah. Well, I see Charles is here. Do you have any thoughts on what constitutes a glue guy when it comes to team sports?
Oof. I mean, obviously, personality's big, right? Somebody
Yeah.
that can kind of draw everybody in, is well respected. Maybe not the best player necessarily on the team, but is one that everybody kind of looks to as a leader that gets them. The guy who's always at the center, right? You guys watch Hard Knocks?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, the guy who's always at the middle in the beginner where they're like, 1, 2, 3 team, that's like the glue guy that I think about. Harold might see it differently.
Were you describing me, Charles? Was that what you?
Eh,
I was saying you're the glue guy. You're like the Jerry.
I just I
You
didn't
make
want
it
to
happen.
You're
interrupt you
you're
if
the
that's what
Jerry
was
or the
going on.
John.
It's not about the X's and the O's, it's the Jimmys and the Joes, right?
That's right.
funny enough, I said that to my boss this week. He'd never heard it before. I thought that was strange. Well, let's dig into this, right? Scott, when you said a glue guy, was that the same kind of person that Charles described? Because to me, I
I
think what he described was a little different than what you did.
No, I think we described it in very similar terms, and obviously,
Okay.
it's like it's an ephemeral sort of definition we have here. But like once again, not necessarily the best player, not the greatest scorer, not the greatest rebounder, but like if you think about like in hockey, I got like plus minus. Like when he's off the ice, things goes to shit, right? But when he's there, the team stays together, or like the culture's there. On like a football team, 11 people on the team, or 52 man roster, 88 college, right? They keep the team together. Somehow their presence is there. And like that is like the special ingredient that I'd love to find. Network analytics, personality, not sure.
Scott's gonna be a millionaire once he figures this out. He's gonna do it though.
I don't know. I might say a billionaire.
Yeah, yeah, true.
If you could
Um,
find the secret sauce to teams, right? And that what makes that magic happen? Yes, absolutely.
what similar to Scott having a curiosity around a glue guy, I've had a curiosity about the concept of with NFL quarterbacks, and I feel like of anyone on earth, we've got the two people that we could actually get to answer this question, which is what makes the game slow down. So you always hear like the more tenured quarterbacks they get better and the game slows down for them. And it's like, what on earth does that mean? Because obviously time is a constant; it doesn't change, right? And so, what makes the game slow down? Is there any research behind this that you guys have done or other people have done in this space?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and certainly I like that as a description of what's occurring. Um, I think it's multiple things. I mean, on the one hand, we've certainly found a strong prediction or correlation between aspects of intelligence and performance. So I think there is something to how you process information, how you see the field, and it does predict outcomes. So I think that that's key. I think there's certain aspects of performance, like that ability to see an ambiguity when things are a bit unclear, still being able to make good decisions and pick up on cues. That probably plays out in the way you're describing that. So most people call that what? The red zone. You know, you're down in the red zone. How do things see? How do you see things? Do
Mhm.
you become confused? And certainly the defense is trying to confuse you. But I do think that there is this horsepower aspect of intelligence that plays out there. The second part would be experience, right? I mean,
Yeah,
meaning the more you've
absolutely.
seen the things, the more you've seen it, the more you can kind of rely on your experience. So I think it's both. Um, would be my take at least.
There's
Like,
probably a piece of
oh, I'm sorry, Charles,
I was
please.
gonna say there's probably a piece of like personality from like stress tolerance, and that over time with that experience and your horsepower, it just things don't seem to phase you anymore, right? You become more resilient to, yeah, I might get sacked,
Yeah.
but if I slow it down, I might make the pass as well.
I think it's a great point by Charles. One of the things that we needed to do was blend like how you react to stress with how you make decisions. You know, looking at them in isolation wasn't going to help, but by blending them together.
Mhm.
And one of the guys we worked with, Ken Yusko, who helped build the test and is our partner on all of this, he's down at University of Maryland on the faculty. He did a lot of work to blend our personality measures with our cognitive measures to predict those kinds of outcomes. And we called the factor decisions under stress. And obviously, it's one of the most critical things that predicts success for quarterbacks.
I mean, I've heard like F1 drivers talk about the same thing. Like they get behind the wheel and like their depth perception becomes like very precise. Their speed and like their ability to like navigate becomes like everything slows down, right? And like to your other point about getting sacked, like what Tyson said, like everyone has a plan until they get hit, right? And that's the people that can rise above. That once they get smacked, they can actually go ahead. But like you talk about intelligence, like are we talking about like fluid intelligence? Obviously, probably not crystallized in some respects, right? But what is most predictive in these sort of in sports contexts or the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, I do think fluid, that notion of in fluid is where we're aimed at.
Mhm.
We try and multi-dimensionalize aspects of that. So maybe that goes in a little different way than how the field has gone in the past, but we're trying to pick up on nuances of how intelligence manifests in that particular job. And so that would be seeing things in ambiguity, understanding the complexity of certain situations, understanding
Yeah.
specific direct linear patterns that you need to follow, picking up on errors and cues around errors. So I think it's a really complex, it's such a complex construct, intelligence.
I.e. things you would see on the football field, right?
Right, absolutely. And the kinds of inputs they're getting and how they piece them together. Um, I think we've done a little bit of a disservice in the field of trying to understand intelligence because we make it in some ways a little simplistic, yet it's one of the most exciting constructs that human beings have.
Oh,
Um, yeah,
absolutely. And like, but below, like, say, fluid and crystallized, you're talking about the Cattell-Horn-Carroll model, where like we talk about the GF and GC, but like, what there's like sensory motor and like memory and all these other like forms of intelligence, which are equally valid. Well, not equally valid, but definitely relate to overall performance, right?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Carroll, what I love about Carroll is that at least it shows the multidimensionality.
Yeah.
We could think about, well, how do those manifest in certain kinds of work situations with what the work requirements are asking you to do. I'm not sure we've tapped into all of them, and I don't know if we've measured them as well as we need to. I mean, maybe that's something that is problematic about how we've approached intelligence.
I think we've already like just kind of like jumped in too quickly, right? Like, what are you guys up to? And like, we're already like into the sports because
Yeah.
we're like big old
Let,
sports nerds. But
let me tee him up.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I am so thrilled that we're getting to talk to you, Harold, and you, Charles, because what our listeners probably don't know is the NFL before the draft every year is now assessing all of its players using different psychological constructs. And the two people who put that together are on our podcast right now. That to me is freaking amazing.
Mhm.
And so, can you guys tell us what exactly is going on before the NFL draft? Because it's coming in a few weeks. This is so relevant. And how did you get into that space? And what are players being assessed upon? And maybe we can even get to share some of the data that you all have collected over time from the assessment that you've done. But I'd like you guys to just tee us up first because this is fantastic work.
I'll let you tell the story, Harold, because you're a good origin story sort of guy. So
That's just because I'm older. Um,
You got more
yeah,
stories.
no, we appreciate getting the chance to talk about it. It's been really exciting work for us. Back in 2012, a guy named Cyrus Mary, he's a civil rights lawyer out of Washington, D.C. He was involved in the Coca-Cola case around discrimination, the Texaco case. So some of the biggest cases in our field about discrimination. He was involved in those. Um, we had worked on him in a number of consent decree situations, trying to build solutions for various organizations using IO techniques. He also does a ton of work with the NFL. So him and Johnny Cochran, who I guess is kind of back in the news as of yesterday, him and Johnny Cochran worked with the NFL on what's called the Rooney Rule, which was the notion of having a diverse candidate slate as a kind of diversity technique for trying to hire more diverse coaches, particularly in the NFL. So he knew of our work from some of the legal cases we had been involved in, and asked us to come talk to the NFL about how we measure intelligence. The NFL was interested they were in this mode of elevate the game around that area. So they wanted to get more in-depth psychological assessment as another key area to measure about players that they figured would predict success. So he was the one who brought us in to present to the NFL, and the NFL kind of embraced the idea of expanding the assessment into intelligence and eventually into other important characteristics.
They were already running the combine at this point, so obviously they're already used to measuring all sorts of and like you talk about like high stakes decisions, right? The value of a first round top 5 pick is far different than Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, right?
Absolutely, definitely high stakes decisions. Absolutely. So they were uh, they were kind of focused on getting more data. I mean, it's in this time of analytics, as you all know. Matter of fact, some of the places we presented at the initially wasn't PSYOP or anything like that, but it was the MIT Sloan Sports Conference
Mhm.
talking about integrating measures of psychological assessment as part of the data that would be used when they do things like Moneyball and try and predict outcomes. So the NFL was, had used the Wonderlic, I think, since the 70s. Charles,
Yeah.
is that right?
yeah, that was Tom Landry when he first put in the combine in place. That was kind of something that's been part of its DNA since the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. So they were just in a mode where maybe we could augment the Wonderlic and build in some other measures. And that's why they approached us back in 2012. We went in and presented to them. Ken Yusko and I went in and presented to them. And they said, yeah, let's build a test, which was kind of cool because we knew we'd get to do job analysis, which meant we got to talk to players and GMs and coaches, and so that was kind of one of the most fun job analysis we got to ever do. So
Said no one ever.
I know.
like the
I
most
don't know,
fun
in
job
this
analysis.
context though, right? Like, going in and watching all the football games, right? I mean, this isn't watching a cashier, right?
No,
What's
no,
interesting about it is you basically took the same techniques that you'd use for traditional selection and you just applied it to a new situation. So for those who aren't familiar with what you do to select traditional workers more effectively, what did you guys do with the NFL to get the kind of construct validation that you were looking for here?
yeah,
I think,
Charles.
yeah, one of the things that was really interesting is that validation was top of their mind. You think about anybody
Mhm.
who's worked in the talent management or talent acquisition space, you're often struggling to get companies to invest in doing a validation. For them, it was a requirement because they're only going to invest in things that work. And the other thing is that they were so, you know, oftentimes there's negative stereotypes as it relates to sports. They were so insightful and thoughtful. As Harold mentioned, it started with an intelligence test, and quickly they're like, well, what about these other things like leadership, teamwork, resilience, preparation, the things that make somebody really great? And so this really quickly ballooned from just looking at intelligence to looking very comprehensively at a whole person as a player. But I think what was, interesting from our perspective, you think about a lot of entry level jobs, right? We'll give standardized assessments. We'll use those standardized assessments in a variety of different methods of use to determine who to hire. Um, but this is the kind of stakes that you usually don't have at the entry level. So this would be like hiring an executive where if you make a
Yeah.
bad decision, there's real consequences, but we generally can't do the types of IO psychology techniques for those jobs because there's so few people.
Cole briefly brought up the quadrant system
Yeah.
there. What were these? Cognitive ability, personality. What else was it called? Or Harold or Charles. I mean.
It's learning styles,
You'd
needs,
think
and
we'd have them
motives.
memorized, right? Uh, yeah, they were very focused on learning because there's a lot of restrictions around how much time they can have the players on the field during training camp. So there was a lot
Yeah.
going on around that, and they really wanted to focus in on, well, how do these guys learn? How can we get them quickly up to speed to be ready to play? So they focused on that. They wanted to know what drove them, so that was the needs, which was probably our least in-depth and assessment was around needs. It kind of reminded us we need to think about that with more depth. As we said, we started with intelligence, um, and I think almost every interview they started by saying, well, I'm just a dumb jock, but here's what I think, and then they would just give a manifesto. I mean, it was just incredible their insight of these GMs and coaches and player personnel people. They just see this stuff with such in-depth resolution that we were just scribbling notes constantly. Really amazing.
Well, it makes sense that learning plays such a role here. I mean, most jobs, the percentage of time that you are doing learning versus performing, maybe it's 5% learning, 95% performing. Whereas the NFL, it's probably the opposite, where 95% of your time is in practice and only 5% of your time is executing in a real game. And so I could see why this has to be one of the key things that's assessed to try to determine effectiveness in the NFL. So
It
this is fascinating.
it it was incredible. So Charles and I and Kenny and Elliot Larson, who's on our team, we spent weeks in training camp with them, and we would sit in these, in the various player meetings
Hmm.
and watch them cutting through swaths of data on different plays and what they needed to do and how they needed to configure things on the field. And, we've all watched football forever. And it was like an alien language. I mean, we
Mhm.
just had no conceptualization of the sheer amount of things these guys needed to learn. It was really amazing.
Just look at like a wide receiver's chart, right? Like you go up
Mhm.
the ladder, and like if the defender does this, I go to the left. If they do something else, I go to the right, and they have to be on the same page as the quarterback and seeing the same things.
Yeah.
In incredibly cognitively demanding, right? Like we don't have this sort of coordination in any sort of business setting, not to that degree, anyway.
No, you're absolutely right. And what we've found is that our intelligence measures predict across the board for all the positions. Now, they do predict more for certain positions than others, but they predict across the board. And in particular, our measures around visual processing
Yeah.
just cut across everything. It's amazing. Doesn't matter what position you are, you've got to be able to process that visual information in a meaningful way.
So I would hypothesize that a running back would be like the purest position because like it's all vision, speed, power. Give
Yeah,
me the ball, I run.
it's you're totally you probably know more about football than us, because the running back was the one where we didn't predict as well, except for that visual.
Yeah.
That visual insight was critical for them. Same thing with wideouts. Those are the hardest for us to predict from an intelligence standpoint, but that visual processing is so powerful for them.
Well, from a technical standpoint, how do you assess the visual components versus the psychological components?
Yeah, and so we've done it a couple ways. So, thinking back, you talked about we earlier talked about the CHC model. And so we had some, you know, in the intelligence component of it, we have a lot of visual items that require them to work with new information, understand if then type relationships that we were just talking about. And then we've kind of evolved. So the key with working with the NFL is that we have to be constantly chasing the next innovation to make sure that we're helping them elevate the game through the
Yeah.
assessment. So we moved to introducing a lot of dynamic type items. So things are moving on the screen that they need to track. Um, and now we've evolved a little further and we've started implementing eye tracking. So we can actually look at how they're visually processing different types of stimuli, that's in their visual field. So, we've gone from a very traditional, more static, which worked really well, but
Are
evolved.
are NFL players like super abnormally acute? Like, do they have super abnormal acuity in this space compared to like a normal human being? Or are they within like the normal bounds? Like, I'd just be so curious if like you're a world class athlete and you have world class vision, that you're
Mm.
unstoppable probably at a certain point.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. They definitely are strong in it, but they definitely vary in it, right? And so the one thing that we found most interesting about this was that trying to make predictions is the intersection of three human domains, which is intelligence, personality, and then the one that we don't know as well, which is physical. And it really is an
Mhm.
intersection. So you might have, and the other thing is different combinations lead to success. So you might have stronger physical capabilities, maybe less visual processing capabilities, strong personality drive, and that leads to success, while somebody else might have a different configuration of capabilities. And that made this challenging to try and really understand, but it also reflects reality. Probably reflects reality when trying to predict other jobs too, and we just haven't really approached it that way.
I think I stepped on you earlier, Harold. Like, what position is the most easily predicted from these cognitive measures? I have
From
an idea. I have an idea.
so
Besides quarterback. Besides
what do you
quarterback.
think it is?
Besides quarterback, I'm gonna guess it's the center because like they are commanding the line and the blocking schemes.
See,
I was gonna say the kicker.
See
the,
ball, kick ball.
the
Yeah.
kickers, we don't make any statements around the kickers.
No.
We do test them, but so far we haven't really looked at their data. Uh,
Ironically, the one that has the most psychological
oh yeah, maybe.
minutia going on, right?
Yeah, but yeah. So again, you would have been very helpful on our team. The O line in general has very strong prediction
Yeah.
off of our assessment. Battery, quarterbacks, tight ends. Those three positions are particularly strong. But other areas on the defense, we have pretty good prediction. So D line is one that the intelligence factor predicts pretty well on. So which I think people would not have thought would be the case.
Yeah.
So
And
it's
is there any difference between like a end and a tackle on the D line? Like I would think an end would probably have more. Like a tackle just clogs up space a lot of times, whereas the ends, they have more flexibility in terms of what they're doing. Is there differential prediction amongst the D line?
you guys are so on the right target. The only problem we have, as Charles tells me every time I say, let's do this, is sample size. So we
Mhm.
have 5,000 players tested at this point for the NFL. And the problem is when you break it down by sub position, the samples drop a lot. So we're starting to see some patterns in there, but
Yeah.
none that we feel as confident about. And we try to be conservative. Matter of fact, we measured mental toughness starting out in 2013, but we never gave the scores till 2016, I think, because we just weren't happy with the validity of prediction, and so we just kept leaving it blank. And now, we want to be a bit conservative here because these guys, their jobs are on the line when they use our data. So, we want to try and give them the best that we can.
Well, 3 years is also
What
the average lifespan of an NFL player too, right? So, like, its entire
Yeah.
life cycle there. I mean, with that said, what kind of criteria are we looking at here? I mean, you could break your leg and your season could be over in training camp, right?
Yeah.
Also, well, I mean, that could happen to anybody. I could get hit by a bus today too, you know?
Yeah.
All sorts of things could happen, but NFL, obviously, it's the longer you play, you're gonna get hurt.
Charles,
Yeah.
you got to contribute what Ken talks about with
Uh,
measurable out.
I'm going to channel my inner Ken Yusko. So the one thing that's really been interesting for us is just the whole host of criteria available to us. I mean, I think anybody who watches sports has seen like next gen stats and
Yeah.
all of the real in depth. But what's interesting, where we started was we did something the NFL, they're so used to working with objective data. We started with more traditional performance data where we would, at the end of the season, we would send the clubs confidential evaluations where they would describe the development of the player over the course of the year and would really evaluate them in the dimensions we measure on the test. So that was one starting point for us because we can look at all the stats in the world, but if the team doesn't see them as a leader, are they a leader? But then we've moved into lots of on the field metrics. We're completing a study where we've gone and collected all the college data from all the players in our database. So we're looking, kind of building out the entire space, both predictor and criterion. But
I think
certainly,
the thing I want to call out here, for those that are just listening, not watching, we actually have on the screen all of the different criteria that coaches are assessing players on and the correlations to intelligence, personality, and the overall composite. The thing I wanted to call out here, we're not just talking generically about like, oh, they did a bunch of assessment and there was a cool factor and oh, it was so neat to learn these things. These are actual scientific predictions that are being made with real coefficients that are showing the relationship to real outcomes in the NFL. So like this is world class science using world class researchers. I'm just trying to build you guys up. World class researchers to do this work. Like this is as good as it gets as far as I'm concerned in terms of IO psychology being applied in the real world. So I'm just super thrilled that you guys are here.
It's
We-
super thrilling. I love that it boils down to, like, supervisor ratings, right?
Right.
Essentially.
You got it. Supervisor rating. But I will also say that while I love what you said, Cole, the coaches and particularly the GMs, started presenting those correlations to them, and they were like, I don't really, what does that
Yeah.
mean? Like what does a 0.28 correlation mean to me? And that really pushed us in terms of trying to translate it into what does it mean for these guys, from that
Well,
standpoint.
let
That
me
was
put on my GM hat for a second because again, we're not just psychologists; we're people analytics professionals. When you start to look at correlations like this, and then you have because I know we said today we wouldn't talk about any specific players, right? But
true.
these coaches and GMs, they're getting data on each specific player. They can build their own predictive models based on this and test out the predictions that are made against what they see on the field. So it's not just theoretical 0.28 or 0.40 or whatever the correlation, which for those who aren't familiar, a 0.40 correlation is excellent in the social sciences. Like it's about as good as it gets. And so if you're seeing these type of correlations, you can put them into your own models and test them out in reality and hire your own data scientists and do this for you. So like these are very actionable insights.
It's exactly what they did. And I got to tell you, for some reason, back in 2012, 2013, when we started this, when we started working with some of the clubs, just because we're always open to talking to them about the data, they were very much at the beginning of some of those analytical departments. I think maybe they were, MLB started it and football was kind of coming in a little later to it. So they were talking about Excel sheets and guys who could run spreadsheets. And now when we talk to clubs, they're doing exactly what you said, Cole. They have in-depth people, statisticians out of Georgia Tech and all these places running incredibly in-depth models on the data to hopefully use it effectively. Because the one thing we tell them is this is just one assessment. They should be using
Yeah.
all They should be using other assessments, other psychological assessments. They should be using their interviews, what their scouts say, everything, and put it in a model to make predictions. Absolutely.
Yeah, like I imagine for baseball, right? Imagine if you use the same eye tracking techniques to assess catchers on the ability to
Yeah.
react in real time to 100-mile-an-hour pitches,
Yeah.
right? Like there's a lot of transferability here that could go to other leagues, but I mean, is NFL the most progressive in this space? Are they the ones that have leaned into this the most?
I feel like they have, Charles. I mean, I feel like they had this view of saying we want a league wide assessment. They also allow other assessments by club. So they want the clubs to be able to do what they want to do. But they said, but let's have some kind of bottom line assessment across the league. So they were really forward looking that way. We have spoken to other leagues. They haven't necessarily moved in that direction. So we've ended up working with teams like within the NBA, that kind of approach.
Mhm.
But every sports league has their own approach to it. We've been impressed by the NFL's approach. That's for sure.
Definitely. And one of the things that's been really interesting in that approach is it's not just selection, but development. So
Yeah.
once we use our data that once a team drafts a player, we then send them a development report to help them facilitate the development, quickly onboard that player. When you guys were talking a little earlier about how much they learn, I mean, they call it install, like you're basically downloading software into the player, but they have to do that every single week, learn brand new systems, brand new schemes. Things are always changing. And so for them, it's not only making sure they get the right person, but then how do they get the best out of them quickly?
You guys have developed a great system here to select NFL players and train them up, etc. Can you tell me why the Cowboys don't use this? I'm kidding. I'm
no,
kidding.
no comment.
No comment.
Comment.
You want to move on to the confusion matrix?
Yeah, let's do some confusion matrix. The confusion matrix. Well, what you got for us today, Scott?
What do I got? Let's do a little research roulette. How about that?
All right, this is
Okay,
perfect.
so
We got two academics. We got some fake research
Yeah,
articles.
absolutely. So we got 3 studies. 1 is real, 2 are fake. And your task is to identify the real one, okay?
I defer to Charles as the
Oh
expert.
man.
Okay, so this first one is the title is Cross Species Communication. Do plants respond to human pep talks? This is from the Journal of Interspecies Interactional Interspecies Journal. Pardon me. Probably gave that one away. That's not actually it, right?
Or it's a trick. I've
Or
fallen
it's a
for the
trick. It's
before.
very roozy, right?
I was going to say, I'm excited to read that one, to tell you the truth.
The second one is a full or empty beer bottle sturdier. Pardon me. Are full or empty beer bottle sturdier, and does it fracture threshold suffice to break the human skull? This is from 2009 from the University of Bern. No journal title. So, does a sturdy or full a full or empty beer bottle fracture easily on a human skull? And finally, the title is The Societal Impact of Misplaced Grocery Carts from the Social Dynamics and Public Spaces Quarterly. So, once again, you have do plants respond to human pep talks? Are full or empty beer bottles more likely to shatter on a human skull? Or the societal impacts of misplaced grocery carts?
And for you guys' sake, I don't know the answer, but I'm saying number 2 has no way in hell getting through IRB. Unless they did the study in like 1920 or something, that can't be it.
Or after games for the Premier League, they could be doing the
Yeah.
studies there.
A nice
Yeah,
field
probably.
study.
What do you guys think? What's the real one?
Charles is
Maybe the cart. I'm thinking the carts.
There's not like that's like the lowest common denominator in human civilization, right? Like it's purely altruistic sort of behavior, right? There's no reward for you. It's only reward for society. So I don't know. I'm just saying maybe you can include it in the NFL measures. Do you return the card or not? Right?
I say
the actual answer.
it's got to be the cart. Just because I know you, Scott, I'm starting to learn like the ones are the ones that were curious to you that those are the right answers, and so I'm like, it's got to be number three.
So Scott, I'm gonna only because you said that, I'm gonna tell you at the very first combine, I was sitting outside the testing room, and I started to watch how the players came out, whether they let the door slam while other players
Yes,
are still taking the test. So I
I
started
love this.
coding that data as they came out as a predictor to see if it predicted anything about the players. It didn't. But I'm just saying, we were looking to see if players that were more considerate of the other players, you know, in not letting the door slam would have predicted better than our test did. So
See, maybe this is the glue guy, right? Like, so the
there you
guy that
go.
doesn't walk down the middle of the alley while you're trying to drive down,
You got it.
you get your car out of the grocery store, or like the person that just takes too much time at the counter with the register lady, right? It's like, come on, man, you're inconveniencing everybody.
It's great.
Just take all these players to the airport. I've said this many times. Like it puts enough cognitive strain on people that their true colors come out,
We,
right? At least you can tell if they're cool or not, right?
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so what's the right answer, Scott?
The actual right answer is: are full or empty beer bottles sturdier, and does it fracture threshold suffice
No
to break the
way.
human skull? Yeah, I don't have the ability to send this over right now, but Journal of Forensic and Legal Medicine, 2009. Stephen Bollinger. Let's see. The first line is: beer bottles are often used in physical disputes. Bold claim right there. But if the beer bottle breaks, that may give rise to sharp trauma. However, if the bottles remain intact, that may cause blunt injuries. In order to investigate these, blah, 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 blah. But there you go. That's
They
real
must
research.
use
Great.
dummies or something. That can't have been like like
Let's see.
breaking things on people's heads.
Here, let me like quickly scan the abstract. Full bottles broke at 30 J, I guess joules impact energy. Empty bottles broke at 40 joules. These breaking energies surpass the minimum fracture threshold of the human neocranium. Beer bottles may therefore fracture the human skull and therefore serve as dangerous instruments in a physical dispute.
That's great.
This is
Love
Isn't that
very
industry
wonderful?
research.
I got to read that one.
It's I guess there was the incident where the guy was swinging his football helmet a couple years ago at the old Oklahoma State quarterback. I can't remember his name. Rudolph. He got whacked in the noggin.
yeah.
Are there any sort like I watch probably from start to finish probably 150 200 college games a year. Like,
Wow.
and it's not a good thing, trust me. It's not a good thing. But, like, I look at all these sort of, attributes. I'm not looking at a critical eye, just for pure
Yeah.
entertainment. But are there any sort of attributes that you wanna get to, these, like, sort of intangibles that you haven't been able to tap yet? And I'm thinking, like, football speed or football intelligence. I know you have some of these in these,
Yeah.
uh, uh, chart that
Yep.
Cole showed a while ago, but is there anything that you wanna tap that you haven't tapped yet?
Um, I think the drive stuff we need to go deeper into. What motivates?
Yeah.
What gets them excited? I think it can be good from a coaching standpoint, like how to coach the player. So I'd like to go deeper there with our measures of it. Um, I think that's a great question. What else should we measure? We did add things over time. So initially we didn't have like self control, some of those variables, and we did add those out of our work with the University of Nebraska athletics. So interesting
Well,
to
yeah, you brought up like earlier, like Mr. Irrelevant, right? The last pick of the draft.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of measure for like having a chip on your shoulder, like from a personality standpoint, of like somebody who's got an axe to grind who really feels like they need to prove themselves? Like,
The
is that
Rudy
something you
Rudy
think of?
measure.
Yeah.
Oh, Harold will love that as a Michigan graduate and
that's true.
Brady.
He was close to last. Yeah, that's a great. Well, there you go. There's something we need to measure. That chip on the shoulder. Again, it doesn't have to be there, but it could be a good driver for somebody. So that's a great.
Or it could cut both ways. Maybe it's destructive, or maybe there's
Yeah,
like a Goldilocks zone or something with that. I don't know.
yeah,
These would be
yeah.
fascinating questions to answer.
Brady's another good example of just like adaptability. I mean, the guy changed his style throughout his career. Granted, much longer than any other player. I don't think any other player played as long as him,
Yeah.
23 years, something like that. But at the beginning, he relied on his physical abilities, and towards the end, it was all technique,
Yeah,
timing.
dude could
Yeah,
barely run at the end.
yeah.
Right. I don't think he was known for running at the beginning either.
No.
Yeah.
So there you go. But you're right. He did keep adapting. And when you're in the league that long, you've got to adapt because the teams are changing how they approach things, and
And
the
you think,
rules are
yeah,
changing, right? So
when you draft these, I mean, they're in their young 20s, right? So these are
Yeah.
still individuals who are growing and adapting to their life and what football has meant to them. For a lot of them, football has been the center of their life for so long. And so as they start, going to different domains of their life, how does that change and keep them
Mhm.
focused on the game? It's really interesting from a human development perspective.
Like,
Yeah.
how do you handle all the money, right? Like, just all the fame just thrust upon you.
Yeah, that's another criterion variable that we need to be predicting is like who's going to blow all their money, the students or something.
well, Charles said to me the other day, we got to take a closer look at how NIL, speaking of college
Yeah.
football,
Yeah.
right? How NIL is changing things for who's
Yeah.
going to be successful, right?
Well, some of the guys are more lucrative in college than in the NFL,
That's
which
right.
is kind of
Yeah,
crazy. I'm
yeah.
curious though, like obviously Scott and I are sports fans. Were you guys sports fans before you got into this, and did this change your fanhood at all?
It's very different watching at least football. Like, so you might watch over 100 college games. We usually have like our Sunday ticket up with 4 games on at a time, because
Mhm.
for us, every week's the validation. For football, unlike some of the other work organizations, there's multiple discrete events, right? Like each game is important, and so if a player doesn't do what we might have predicted they would do and he got drafted, somebody's looking saying like, why those guys are wrong. So
You you
it's
you're one of the few people that get to play real fantasy football, right? Like,
We,
your
we
predictions come true on the TV.
Yeah, it's definitely stressful from
Yeah.
that standpoint, and it definitely kind of negatively impacts our fan experience because everything's about us. I mean, for me, Charles, everything's about being right
oh
now.
yeah.
Instead, and I was a diehard fan, but now it's more. I've got, Charles is right. We've got the ticket up, and I've got my computers on my lap, and I'm looking at how did somebody score 6 years ago on our test, which so it kind of is. There's a negative aspect. Not that I'm trying to complain because we do really enjoy it, but yeah.
You seem like a guy at the racetrack who's tearing up his cards after the horse loses.
Yeah,
Like, oh God, I
absolutely.
mortgaged the house.
It also stops us from playing fantasy, or at least I keep telling the entire team, including all our graduate students, that they're not allowed to play. I think they just ignore me. But I'm like, I don't want us to be the ones who lose playing that because they're going to say, you have insight into who's supposed to succeed, and you all can't win a fantasy game. So I've at least banned myself from playing fantasy. I don't know if Charles is abiding by my
Oh,
directive.
I am abiding. You don't
Thank
want to be on the losing side when you're supposed to be an insider.
That's
The
right.
dude abides.
The
Yeah,
dude abides.
yeah.
I quit playing fantasy.
The one thing I will say is anytime we're talking to the clubs, they're all looking at their fantasy stuff, so that makes me realize that nobody really needs to listen to me on this stuff.
Well, you talk about the plethora of data sources too. So you got like fantasy stats and like what is it PFF where they rate every player on every
Mhm.
play, and just
Yeah.
there's just massive amounts of information is published everywhere on these people.
Unbelievable amount of data, which opens up that criteria domain.
Yeah, yeah,
It just
yeah.
the fanatics around this produce so much data. I mean, it's our biggest data set and growing. Um, Looking at how things relate to PFF, to approximate value, which is another big measure. Um, the cool thing is we're able to look at how do our top people, how we assess them, do on those kinds of metrics compared to people who we said wouldn't be as strong. So it's great data. I mean, really great data.
I suppose you can't give us a early draft preview, right? Like Caleb Williams, thumbs up, thumbs down.
Oh, dude, don't put him in that
Oh
position.
no, it got real quiet.
Yeah, I got
You gotta move on.
as Harold pulls out his laptop to see how he does in the draft. No,
We
this is hilarious.
we sit on during the draft. We sit on a similar Zoom. Our team, the four of us,
Yeah.
sitting there with the data open, watching each team, seeing which teams are following what we said, which ones are ignoring us. So it's a lot of fun from that standpoint.
Bet you
I'll
it
give
is.
it N of 1. Like, I saw Caleb Williams play at OU in a couple of years at USC. I'm not convinced. A lot of hero ball going on there. Not
All
convinced that's
right.
gonna translate.
Yeah, yeah,
But I'd love to see the stats in a few years, guys. I would love to see the
for sure. We'll do a
predictions.
post-mortem podcast after he flames out. Um, all right. Well, are you guys ready to do some nerdery?
Let's
Sure.
do it.
The nerdery. All right.
Where do you want to
Well,
start?
let's why don't we start, since we've talked about college football a few times. Do you want to talk
Mm.
about the impact of college football one, Scott?
Impact of college football. So this is a revisited study from a Oregon study that essentially showed that students' academic performance was negatively affected by team wins, but this was related to Clemson University, and they covered football performance from 1982 to 2002. And it looked like I read this a couple of days ago. It looked like a regression, but they partialed out some control variables, etc. But the findings essentially show that football record does negatively impact student grades. The effect was more pronounced for female students than male students, which is contrary to the Oregon study. In the carryover effects of poor grades, there is a carryover effect of poor grades into the spring semester. But also the college received more applications for admittance after a good football season. So there's a need to balance these two things out. And I love that they took a shot at Oregon here. They said, well, the reason that the male students didn't have an impact on their grades is because they're going to watch whether we win or lose. Oregon, they're going to watch only when they're winning.
Oh, oh, that's
Ouch.
salty.
It's like,
When,
whoa,
and just to be clear, this is if the team does better, people perform less well at school. That's
correct,
what the
correct.
negative correlation is. And I think it I think it makes
It
valid
makes
sense
sense,
that when
man.
the team is winning, maybe people are partying a little bit more than
The-
studying a little bit less than maybe they should. Now, I was curious about the female versus male findings. I would have expected the opposite, but that was really interesting to find.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, they say that the males are going to watch no matter what in the South because it just means more, right? It just means more in the
Well,
South.
Clemson, that's not an SEC school, but yeah,
80s,
sure.
well, the ACC. I mean, like 82 to 2002, they weren't that great either. A
No,
lot of
they
rough
weren't.
Clemson
That was
years.
like right when their kind of dynasty started, was at the
Yeah,
end of
starting to
the
ramp
study.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to see him do this at Alabama or Ohio State or schools that have just been dominant for so long.
Well,
Yeah,
there would be no variance
Yeah.
because the number of wins would be range restricted.
Yeah.
Alabama did lose to Louisiana Monroe. Saban's first year. That was probably
Wow.
Yeah, that was a while ago though.
That's
2005,
interesting.
7, something like that.
It
But
would be
it makes
cool.
sense. Like you spend all your time like looking at blog posts or reading Twitter or, as Cole mentioned, you go in the bar. You gotta like get your time in, man. With your boys
It's interesting.
or girls in this case. Girls are
So
negatively impacted too.
Yeah. Well,
So the so I mean this has nothing to do with those findings, but it does have to do with college sports. So the one place we're doing in-depth work is University of Nebraska. They have like a human performance center there where they look at trying to predict performance and develop performance across all these different disciplines. You know,
Yeah.
doctors, psychologists, everybody under the sun. So they brought us in, and we built a similar type of assessment for them that we did for the NFL. And one of the coolest things we did find was our test predicts football performance on the field as viewed by the coaches and how they're doing. The sample's too small to go with on-field data, but it does predict it. But one of the studies that their internal people did is they went and talked to their nutrition people, the doctors that work with them, the sports psychologists, the academic advisors, and they even pulled like their grade point average. And they showed that these core factors that we were measuring predict all of these different things, and it was kind of like a 360 in their life. And it shows that these psychological things that you have, they're going to impact all aspect of your life. So they were
Mhm.
predicting their academic viability and whether they showed up for tutoring sessions, all these independent
Yeah.
ratings of their life. It was really cool.
Well, and that's fascinating because what I would have expected as the younger a person is, so like high school football, athletic ability can probably outweigh everything else.
Mhm.
And
Hmm.
then in college, more behavioral or psychological data probably starts to play more of a role. And then in the NFL, it may even flip to where the because everyone in the NFL is just a world class athlete in one way or another. So then it like all the variance associated with that goes away. So it's got to be almost all psychological or some other variable at that point in time. I mean, I feel like that logically would make sense.
I think what you're saying is right. I mean, I think it's hard to find that level of minimum competence that you need, but yeah, I agree. And Charles, when you and I were speaking, remember a few years ago, we went to talk to Google about lessons learned from the NFL. And one of the things we said to them is probably everybody you hire is bright. Just like you just said, the NFL, probably everybody
Yeah.
that's in the game has physical ability. In some companies, intelligence is kind of that bottom line, and the variance they see in performance is other factors: drive, personality, ability to work with others. So it's really interesting, again, that three different domains of human capability and how they intersect to predict outcomes.
Or even just the power of conscientiousness across fields, like the ability to
Yeah.
show up to class,
Right.
do your
It showed
homework.
up in the results early. I don't know if you saw that,
Yeah,
but that was one of the highest correlations
go
was
figure.
personality and whether they showed up on time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love this, like, this Galton lab too. It's like everything goes back to Francis Galton. Just like, "Hey, we're gonna measure everything. We're gonna figure it out." I love it.
Well, let's stay on the theme of athletics and go to our next one. Cheers versus jeers.
Cheers versus jeers. So this is not the best study overall, but it's definitely fun, right?
I think a lot of our
So
studies are not the best study, but
yeah.
they're fun.
So this study examined the different types of audience feedback and how they impact individual sports performance. So specifically, cheering, jeering, and total silence. So the method, they gathered D3 athletes from some school and people that played basketball, baseball, and golf, and they put them in front of 10 Confederates from a psychology course, and they instructed the Confederates to cheer, jeer, or remain silent. It's the first and probably only time I'll ever see the words "you suck" in a method section. So I mean, just FYI. But the results are kind of interesting. So basketball, unaffected by any of the conditions, right? Whether you're cheering, jeering, or silent. Baseball pitchers worsened when the audience jeered, but as compared to whether they were silent or cheering. So they got worse when people jeered. Golf, they performed best during silence, but worse during cheering or jeering. So there you go.
I feel like those
Interesting.
results make perfect sense, at least on the golfer front, because golfers, other than Tiger Woods, because Tiger Woods' dad was always messing with him, from any of the documentaries, they always are used to golfing in complete silence. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
But
I kept
I'm not surprised about the basketball players either, because the free throws. Everybody's seeing people yelling during the free throws, whether it's for you or against your team. So I think that
I
makes sense
I
too.
think that's kinda like rote memory too, or just like motor use like muscle memory, just like, here's how you get the ball in the hoop because it's 15 feet all the time. Like, I guess you could say the same thing from teeing off from a golf tee as well as, like, a pitcher mound, which is how they did the baseball pitcher.
Yeah,
kept thinking about Happy Gilmore the whole time I was reading this article.
it's pretty funny. I wonder, like, why do you think the baseball pitchers, like, why that? That's the only thing that kind of I wouldn't have expected.
Have y'all ever seen, it's worth a YouTube search, but Texas A&M Ball 5 chant? So it's insidious, it's insidious. I wish we had the ability to pull it up right now. But after a 4-pitch walk, the crowd starts chanting, like, "Ball 4, ball 4," and, like, the, next batter will get up, and they throw a ball again, be like, ball 5," and they'll go to, like, ball 11, like, pitchers throwing the ball into the dugout, into the fence, and, like, it rattles them, and of course it would. It's the most insidious sort of fan behavior you could imagine. It rattles them. So like that's all I was thinking about. Not Happy Gilmore, but I was thinking about this Texas A&M fan behavior. It's wild, wild stuff.
Uh, this is awesome.
I thought the article was really interesting as a starting point. I figure you got to dig deeper. First of all, I love it plays off of Dr. Zientz's, social facilitation. I said to Charles when
Yeah.
we read it, he was my honors thesis class advisor at Michigan. And we used to every course in psychology at Michigan, the first article you had to read was his social facilitation article because it was just so perfect about, the impact in one direction or the other direction of having the mere presence of others around him. So I thought that was really interesting. I think it's a good starting point. I don't know if we really totally understand it based on the article you sent over. I thought it was interesting. And the one thing it brought up in my mind, and I'm always going to that intelligence stuff, but I remember hearing an O line guy, I think he played for Seattle, for your team, Charles, talking about he was listening to the crowd because if the crowd, when he was on the road, if the crowd started to roar, he knew that his quarterback
Yeah.
was going to get sacked. Like he wasn't sitting there getting
Wild.
negatively affected because he was getting stressed about the crowd yelling at him. He was using it as a cognitive input to know what to do. I mean, it really, so I think people use that kind of thing in different ways and probably react to it in different ways. So I think it's a cool topic. That's for
And
sure.
that's another great example of the game slowing down for a player,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Is like when the rookie offensive lineman probably isn't consciously aware of what's going on there to use that metacognition to react differently because of that. So that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I maybe on the other end of the spectrum, like when I was a kid playing sports, I wouldn't hear the crowd at all. Like just you silence it out. Your brain just shuts that totally down. But I guess
That's
I'm
Yeah,
not a
interesting.
pro athlete either. Yeah.
that's probably your basketball finding, right? They just shut that all out, right?
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
focus.
Yeah. That focus.
And that
Yeah.
was what the thing I read, because like again, I agree the study's not like that great, but the thing I think about with it is why aren't why isn't focus translating across all sports? Right? Why is it just in basketball? Why not golf? Why not the pitcher? Why is ball five even having an effect? Like
Mhm.
to me, that seems like it should be transferable amongst sports.
You wonder if it's something about how they learn the sport. Like I was thinking of tennis when I was reading this too, because people get really upset if there's any movement or
Yeah.
talking when they're trying to serve, and can go like get really emotional and go ballistic. But there's something about the learning environment, right? When you golf, it's always quiet. You're outdoors. Basketball, it's always loud, which is why the baseball is so interesting, right? Because it's usually kind of loud always at baseball. Why that would throw them off? I mean, maybe it's you're kind of on a little island by yourself there, and it's really kind of helping. It's hurting you from getting into whatever mental space you need to get into.
Yeah. Well, we got one more nerdery article, and I just when academics come on, I always want to talk about something academic in nature as well, and so let me pull it up real quick. It's called "What Will You Do After," and it's from the Journal of Quarterly Journal of Experimental Psychology, and what they do is they followed post psychology PhD graduates to find out where they go in their careers. And the thing I wanted to call out here, first on a personal level, but well, actually, I'll start with they 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 put a alluvial chart in here, which I'm a huge fan, or they're also sometimes called Sankey charts. That I love giving a call out for any good Sankey chart out there because I feel like they're an underused visualization. But second of all, what they find is how many folks that go pursue psychology PhDs end up in non-academic positions. And so on a personal level, I get asked all the time by people who are thinking of going and getting a PhD because I guess they presume the only career option after that is to go into academia. And you look at this, and I don't have the exact numbers on here, but on the alluvial chart, I mean, it looks like probably only 1 out of 5 people getting their psychology PhD actually goes into academia. Many go into non-academic roles, and the biggest of which is this category they called academic adjacent, which is things like research, outreach, industry research, policy work, that type of thing. And then there's other folks that is probably the second biggest category, but still considerably smaller, which are in the skill transfer area, doing things like data science and project management and that type of thing. But I, for Harold and Charles, for you guys, I mean, you've got your own graduate students. Does this track with your experience of the folks that are coming through your PhD program?
Yeah, we really enjoyed reading it just for that reason. I'm like, this is IO psychology when I was looking at it. And it's interesting as you think about the data science track, that's something that's radically grown, for people in our field. So at some point, maybe things will flip where that's going to be one of the larger parts of that graph. But we
Absolutely.
always love that. It's opportunity. There's things that we would have never thought an IO would have done, and somebody gets an opportunity to do it.
Yeah, I agree with Charles. The idiosyncratic nature of careers and where you end up is one aspect of it. The other aspect is that, you know, we talk about it as research, but it's really, think about the things we do. We're learning how to predict outcomes. I mean, that's a really broad space. You could go work at Microsoft and try and help predict outcomes. You could go work in so many different functions, not within HR. You could go work within marketing, within other areas. And so, teams and how people interact and get along. I mean, that's got such broad applicability, way outside of even HR within companies, right? And so there's that aspect of it as well.
Um, we told like PhD students like you can go out and do whatever you want, but like part of that is just knowing what's out there in the first place, right? And that's what I like about this. It provides a good description of the various subfields that you can go into, and so you can at least read about it, like get a good sense of what they are. And whenever I talk to kids in grad school, I tell them to be very critical about your own skills and what you want out of life and what you enjoy doing, really, because once you're in it, you are in it, right? So if you don't enjoy teaching, there's other tracks for you. If you do enjoy teaching, by all means, go for it. But there's other things that you can do, and like Tears for Fears, they said like everybody wants to rule the world. Maybe not everyone can be like the CEO of a company because that takes like a different sort of skill set. Even though everyone's kind of like pushed to be grow up the ladder, this sort of thing. But I love that it provides a snapshot in a qualitative fashion of the descriptions of the various things that you can do because, like to your point, it's our skills are fungible to a lot of different areas. There's a lot of ways we can utilize them.
and
Yeah.
and it tells you also to be very, don't read just within our field.
Yeah.
Don't stay
Yeah.
up on
Yeah.
things just within our field. Read across, all these different things. Stay open to other things because you just never know where you'll see that connection. you know so I mean, maybe it's just a way to rationalize reading
No.
People magazine and Rolling Stone, but I'm just saying,
No.
you
No. No.
got to stay you got to stay kind of out there because you'll see where things integrate and you'll get that interdisciplinary outcome, or approach, that might really open up new doors and new ways of thinking.
Some of the oldest IO research is consumer research, right?
That's right.
Applying to the consumer, and
Yeah.
we've kind of gone away from that, or like
Yeah.
limited ourselves in some respects, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
human factors.
If you replace the word research with the word science, you're just
Yeah.
doing science, and science
Mhm.
cuts across all disciplines, right? So it's really
Absolutely.
important to stay aware across all of those things. Once you've got that toolkit, you can answer just about any type of question.
Yeah.
You, you,
Creativity. It's the only thing that would limit you.
yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, we're right. I think we use terms that make it sound so narrow, but we're
Yeah.
trying to understand human behavior. We're trying to understand
Yeah.
outcomes. We're trying to make connections of what will predict what will occur. You know, if I said those things out loud, nobody would even know that IO psych is what I'm talking about. I mean, they're very broad things. Um,
Hmm.
so it gives us a lot of opportunities, which is cool because, there's a lot of fun things to do out there.
You guys going to PSYOP? Getting pumped for PSYOP?
We
Yeah. What
are.
about you all?
Oh yeah, getting
You got
ready.
the live show during PSYOP, right? Excited for that.
Come on down.
Yeah.
Come on down.
Yeah, we can't stop talking about it. It's like all we talk about nowadays. I feel like it's just shameless self promotion at this point, but who cares? Well, I mean, what kind of music are you guys into? Like, I heard from a little birdie that you might be Deadheads.
Certainly, yep. We've spent our time around the Grateful Dead music. Charles and I like outlaw country a little bit
Oh, yeah.
also.
All right.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've always enjoyed music. One thing that just happened to happen was our team all liked music, other than Kenny. Although he's always willing to come along, so it's great. So
Dang it,
we've
Kenny.
definitely connected over that. And whenever we're on the road for work, we try and make it intersect with being able to catch some music. So.
And
Yeah.
being in New York City is great for that, since everybody comes through here. And so we try to find who's going to be the next up and coming thing at some small venue in New York.
Yeah, that's true.
Eating
How
some
many
Cherry Garcia ice
Dead
cream.
how many Dead shows y'all seen?
You're gonna. I saw the Dead only once in '94, and then
Okay.
I've seen Dead and Company. But Harold's answer is gonna blow your mind.
Well, I don't know about blow your mind, but no, closer to 100.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were with a buddy of mine I met in grad school back at Maryland, Eric Braverman. We bonded over the Dead and found ways to see them without missing too many classes. So that was a positive.
I would say it's like a power law distribution with Deadheads, but I mean, like even 100 doesn't sound that high from some of the
It
totals I've
really
heard.
isn't.
Yeah.
It really isn't. But it was a good cross section.
Yeah, those Deadheads just got to keep on trucking, right?
They seem to
Oh,
be
dirty.
everywhere. I bet you it'd be a good thing to figure out with PSYOP. I bet you there's a lot of deadheads there.
I bet you there are.
Let's start a
Yeah.
group.
If there aren't enough already. Well, guys, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've been so thrilled to have you involved here and acknowledge our friend of the podcast, Alan Kamen, for making the introduction. So thanks, Alan. But Scott, any final words for our guest before we
Oh,
let him go?
I'm just an armchair quarterback, and it seems like it's easy as picking out a shirt for a toddler, from your armchair. But it's great to see you guys like actually doing this, and it's super fascinating. We could talk for another hour. Love to have you guys on again.
Absolutely. We really enjoyed this. This was great. Thank you. Thanks to Alan for connecting us. And this was just a great conversation. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, and thanks for doing your work with the podcast. This is really a great resource for our field. I love this is what I listen to when I run in the morning. So, we really appreciate the good work you guys are doing.
Oh, you poor thing. I'm so sorry.
No, you get me thinking, and it's great.
See, I listen to the Dead, and he listens to the podcast. That's the way it works. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, you've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott, and today's guests, Harold Goldstein and Charles Scherbaum. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
I'd like to say a big thank you to our first few patrons of the podcast, Max Blumberg, Nicole Lettich, and Reed Bramble. Thanks so much for your contributions to making the podcast possible. If you'd like to learn more about how to be a patron, keep listening now. Directionally Correct is dedicated to you, our listeners, to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics. By supporting this podcast, you are helping us continue to provide valuable insights and knowledge to our listeners. Please consider becoming a patron of the podcast. You can find the link to sign up in the show notes or at patron.podbean.com/directionallycorrect. Thanks for your support.